Thank you very much. Whoa, that was very loud. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm basically going to talk for just 25 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes question and answers afterwards, on the courage to set priorities. And I would like to focus on both tackling the big problems in the world, but perhaps particularly focus on global warming, because in many ways that's the discussion that I think most of us have now on thinking about what are big priorities and what are big places we want to fix issues. But before I do that, I would like to just engage us in thinking about what is it that we actually want to achieve when we try to set priorities. Presumably what we want is a better world. Very often we forget to make that very fundamental point, that starting point, to say, before we talk about what should we do, we should talk about what works and what doesn't. What will actually create a better world and what will not. And so what I've put up here is we need to make sure that we do stuff that's rational and not just something that feels fashionable. Not something that's just the politically correct thing to do right now, the thing that makes us feel good, but the thing that'll actually end up making a huge difference in the world, something that'll actually end up doing good. So that's the courage that we need to make sure we don't just do the politically correct thing, the trendy thing, but the thing that'll actually work. The second part is to remember that there are lots of myths out there in the world, certainly for global warming, but also for quite a number of other issues, which I'm sure we can pick up in the questions. But if we have a misunderstanding about how the world works, or what works and what doesn't when we talk about solving problems, we're unlikely to make good priorities. Indeed, if we get scared and if we lose our sense of overall proportion of the problem, we are likely to make very bad decisions. Fundamentally, panic is an unlikely way to make good decisions. And the last point is to remember that we only have a limited pot of money. If we spend money on things that are not so important, it means that money can't be spent on things where we could have done a lot more good. So at the end of the day, if we spend money on over-worrying on some problems, it means we inevitably end up under-worrying about other problems. And that's why I think we need to have the courage to set priorities. We need to ask ourselves, if we want to make a better world, where would our money go to do the most good first? That's what we've asked some of the world's top economists, including 5 Nobel laureates, in something we call the Copenhagen Consensus. We brought those experts together in 2004 and again in 2008, and we're going to redo this again in 2012. Basically, we asked them, if you only had a limited amount of money, where would you get the most bang for the buck, as the Americans like to call it? Where would you get the most return for every reais? I can't say that. What is it? Reais. Yeah, well, I'm sorry. You know what I'm trying to say, but I'm not going to try to do that again. Anyway, so where do you do the most good for each currency unit spent? And what they found was that if they look across all the different problems in the world, all the great solutions, these were the top priorities. They found that for every dollar, for every euro, for every currency spent, you do the most good here. And micronutrients, free trade, and immunization, and agricultural research and development. I would argue that those 4 issues are typically issues that we don't hear very much about. They're not sexy, if you will. They're incredibly important, but we don't hear very much about them, often because there's not very strong interest groups backing them. Take micronutrients. Most of you might not even know what it is, and certainly it's not something we think about. But the fact is that most people in this world don't suffer from malnutrition in the sense that they don't have enough calories. They suffer from malnutrition in the sense that they don't have enough micronutrients. They essentially don't have vitamin pills. We're estimating that almost half of the world's population, about 3 billion people, lack 1 or more micronutrients. Take iron, for instance. Iron deficiency afflicts about 2 billion people in this world. On average, it's estimated that those 2 billion people, because they don't have enough iron, they are about 17% less strong than they could otherwise have been physically, and they lose about 8 IQ points in their development. So basically, we have a third of the world's population being less strong and less smart than they could otherwise have been. And we could do something about that so cheaply. We could address all micronutrient problems, essentially giving people a vitamin pill, although it would be smarter and cheaper in the way that would actually be implemented, by spending about $360 million, not billion, $million a year. We could get half the world's population a much better future. We could make them physically stronger and mentally smarter. Why aren't we doing that? I would argue because it's not trendy. And that goes for the other issues as well. That's why I think we need to have the courage of saying, what is the most important things to do first? But what I'd like to talk to you about, and what I'd like to spend most of the time here, is actually arguing another issue, namely global warming, one that I've been very much involved in, because it in many ways recaptures the whole idea of talking about why is it we're not very good at setting priorities. Because climate change was also among these issues that the Nobel laureates prioritized. And what they actually found was only in 14th space came energy research and development. We should actually be investing in much smarter green energy technologies. And what came at the very bottom of the list was just cutting carbon emissions, which of course is one of the main issues that the world wants to talk about, and certainly one of the main projected do-good things in the world. I would argue, unfortunately, that cutting carbon emissions, while certainly well-intentioned, often end up spending lots of money, but doing very, very little. And so again, the courage is to pick number 14 rather than number 30. And the courage is to say, but even more importantly, let's remember micronutrients and the other things. I'd love to talk more about this, but given the fact that I have to talk about all the world's problems and global warming in 25 minutes, I'm going to rush on. So fundamentally, what I'd like to show you on global warming, and again, this has to be a very short version of this, is really to say, how should we then implement the idea of taking the courage of saying, what's the smart thing, what's the smart way forward in global warming? Now, global warming is not the best place to spend our money, but it certainly is a problem, and it is a place where we should be spending some money, but we should start spending it smartly. So how do we actually get it right in global warming? Of course, I have a picture here of Al Gore, because no presentation on climate change is complete without his picture, and now we've got it out of the way. But fundamentally, Al Gore and many others obviously have good intentions. It's not their intentions that I'm questioning. It's the idea of actually choosing the smartest policies that will end up making us do better on climate change. So what I would like to share with you is basically 4 simple points on thinking about global warming that'll enable us to make better, smarter decisions, and ultimately, of course, pick up the courage to inform everyone else to pick the smartest solutions. So the first point is simply global warming is real, it's man-made, it is an important problem. We should recognize that, and we should actually also, and I would say, thank Al Gore for having put global warming on the agenda for many people. Certainly his film, An Inconvenient Truth, got a lot of people to realize, okay, global warming is real, it is an important problem, let's tackle it. I will get back to how I think it also got people overexcited and exaggerated some of the problems and actually led to bad judgments. But let's give credit to where credit is due. Al Gore actually put this on the agenda. To give you a sense of proportion, I would argue the best information comes from the UN Climate Panel, the IPCC. Obviously, there's been discussions about how the IPCC has been handling information over the last couple of months. But still, despite this being a problem, and it is a problem, I would argue by far it's the best source of information that we have, but it's also a huge amount of information. They publish 3 800-page reports every 5 or 6 years that are just summaries of the thousands or even tens of thousands of peer-reviewed published articles every year on global warming. There's no way we can have that conversation, and that's why I think we need to summarize our arguments down into these 4 points that I'm presenting. The first one being global warming is real.